Don't get near him. He will put you on the ground. The man said it the way soldiers say everything, not as a warning but as a fact already decided. He stood in the waiting room of Ridgemont Animal Clinic with his arms crossed and his jaw set, and the Belgian Malinois at his feet looked like something carved from tension itself. The dog's name was Koda. The man's name was Sergeant Major Wren Blythe, and he had said the words loudly enough that everyone in that waiting room heard them. The elderly couple with their tabby cat in a carrier, the teenager holding a rabbit, the receptionist, who had simply asked if she could bring Koda a water bowl. The receptionist stepped back. The elderly woman pulled her carrier closer. The teenager looked at his rabbit. Nobody moved toward the dog. Wren Solberg had been at Ridgemont for 3 years. She was 31 years old, 5'4", and had the kind of face that people described as approachable, which she had learned, over time, meant that people told her things they hadn't planned to say. Patients' families in hallways, strangers on buses, scared men in waiting rooms who were pretending not to be scared at all. She came through the side door carrying a clipboard, and she saw the dog before she saw the man. Koda was a 4-year-old Belgian Malinois, male, intact, and had served 2 tours in Afghanistan as a detection and patrol dog. That was what the intake form said. What the form did not say, but what Wren could see plainly, was that the dog was holding his left rear leg at a slight outward angle, that his breathing was shallow on the left side, and that his eyes, dark, intelligent, exhausted, were tracking every single person in that room without stopping. Not aggression, assessment. There was a difference, and Wren had learned it the same way she had learned most things worth knowing, by sitting still long enough to watch. Blythe looked at her when she walked in. He looked at the clipboard, then at her name tag, then back at her face. His expression said, "You're the nurse, not the vet, so I'll wait for someone more important." She had seen that expression on men like him before. She did not take it personally. She took it the way you take weather. Noted, adjusted for, moved on. "Koda?" she said, not to Blythe. To the dog. Blythe's hand tightened on the leash. "I said don't." Koda lifted his head. He hadn't lifted his head for the receptionist. He hadn't lifted his head when the door opened and 3 people walked in behind Wren. He had been lying flat on the tile with his chin on his paws, doing the thing that working dogs do when they're in pain, going somewhere else inside themselves, going quiet, going small. But he lifted his head for her, and his ears came forward, and for just a moment the exhaustion in his eyes shifted into something that looked almost like recognition. Blythe noticed. His jaw tightened further, if that was possible. "He's protective," he said. The word came out the way a shield comes up. "He doesn't do well with strangers. He's a working animal. He's not a pet." "I know," Wren said. "I can see that." She crouched down, not approaching, just lowering herself, making herself smaller, changing the geometry of the room. Koda watched her. She watched him back. She wasn't looking at him the way you look at something you want. She was looking at him the way you look at something you're trying to understand. "He's been guarding his left side for a while," she said, still not looking at Blythe. "Is it the hip or further down?" A pause. "They think it's the hip. He came back from his last deployment favoring it. The base vet cleared him, but it kept getting worse." "How long ago was the clearance?" Another pause. "Longer this time. 8 months." She looked up then, not accusingly, just looked. Blythe looked away first, Doctor. Annika Vance came in 20 minutes later, and the examination was quiet and thorough and told them what Wren had already suspected. Koda had a partially torn iliopsoas muscle and a secondary issue with his lumbar vertebrae that the base assessment had either missed or minimized. It was not life-threatening. It was, however, the kind of pain that settles into a body over months and changes it, the way any unaddressed thing does. Blythe stood in the corner of the exam room the whole time, with his arms still crossed, watching. When Dr. Vance explained the treatment plan, rest, targeted physiotherapy, pain management, a follow-up in 3 weeks. He nodded once precisely, like a man signing a form. Wren took notes. She wrote things down clearly, the way she always did, so that whoever read the chart later would not have to guess. When Dr. Vance stepped out to prepare the medication, Blythe spoke. "He didn't growl at you," he said. Wren looked up from the chart. "In the waiting room. He didn't growl at you." He was looking at Koda, who was lying on the exam table, and watching Wren with the same steady attention he had given her since she walked in. "He growls at everyone. He's tired," Wren said. "Pain does that," he growled at the base vet. He had to be muzzled. She was quiet for a moment. Outside the room, she could hear the sounds of the clinic, voices, the click of claws on tile, a door opening somewhere down the hall. "My brother worked with Malinois," she said, "overseas. He used to say they were the most honest animals he'd ever met, that they didn't perform for you. Either they trusted you or they didn't." She paused. "He said you couldn't fake your way into their trust. You just had to be what you were and let them decide." Blythe said nothing. "Koda decided," she said simply, and went back to the chart. He came back 3 weeks later. Follow-up appointment, same time slot, Wren's shift. She was at the front desk when he walked in, and she saw the change before she saw him fully. Koda was moving differently. Still careful, still controlled, but the outward tilt in his left leg was less pronounced and his head was up. Blythe was walking differently too, though she doubted he was aware of it. Less like a man braced for impact. "Sergeant Major," she said. "Blythe," he said, the first time he'd corrected it. "Just Blythe is fine." Koda had already found her with his eyes. When she came around the desk and crouched, he walked toward her, 3 steps, deliberate, and pressed his broad head against her knee. Blythe's hand stayed loose on the leash. He didn't pull back. "He's been doing that," Blythe said, walking toward people, first time since he came home. Wren had her hand on Koda's head, feeling the warmth of him, the solidity. He was leaning into her palm the way dogs do when they've made a decision about you and have no interest in reversing it. "Is that new?" she asked. "Yeah." He cleared his throat. "Yeah, it is." Dr. Vance's assessment that day was positive. The muscle was responding. The secondary lumbar issue would need monitoring, but the pain was being managed and the trajectory was good. Blythe nodded through the whole thing with that same precise nod, but there was something different in it now. Less performance, more actual listening. Before they left, he stopped in the hallway. "The thing you said last time," he started, "about your brother." Wren waited. "He overseas now?" She thought about how to answer that and chose honesty, the way she usually did, because the alternatives cost more energy than she had. "He came back," she said. "It took him a while to do it in the ways that mattered, but he came back." Blythe looked at Koda, then back at her. "Right. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to." It was the 3rd visit that the other people in the waiting room witnessed something they would, individually and in their own ways, end up thinking about for years. There were 5 people waiting when Blythe and Koda arrived. A young couple with a nervous spaniel, a man in his 60s with a geriatric golden retriever, a woman about Wren's age with a cat in a hard carrier who kept checking her phone. The spaniel immediately began pulling toward Koda, which made the golden's owner shift in his chair, which made the cat's owner look up from her phone. Blythe said nothing. He didn't have to. Koda ignored the spaniel with the particular disdain of a dog who has seen actual things and cannot be impressed by a 4-kilogram spaniel's enthusiasm. Wren came out to the waiting room to let them know Dr. Vance was running 10 minutes behind. She saw Blythe, she saw Koda, she crossed the room. What happened next was not dramatic. It was not theatrical. It was in fact entirely quiet. Koda stood when she approached, and when she sat down on the floor in the middle of that waiting room, not caring about her scrubs, not caring about the tile, he walked into her and put his weight against her side and stayed there. 130 pounds of Belgian Malinois, decorated and combat-trained and cleared for deployment, leaning against a 31-year-old clinic nurse like she was the fixed point in a room that was moving. She put her arm around him. She said something to him. Nobody in the waiting room caught the exact words. It was quiet, too quiet, the kind of thing said between 2 people who don't need to be heard. Koda's tail moved, slowly, once, like something unlocking. The young woman with the cat lowered her phone. The man with the golden retriever looked at Blythe. Blythe was looking at Koda. His face was doing the thing that faces do when something you have been carrying for a very long time suddenly shifts, not disappears, but shifts, moves to a different place on your body, somewhere you might be able to carry it better. "He hasn't done that with anyone," the man with the golden retriever said, "because somebody had to say something, and he seemed like the kind of man who understood that." "No," Blythe agreed. "He hasn't." Wren found him in the parking lot afterward, after Koda had been checked and assessed and cleared for continued outpatient physiotherapy, and the paperwork had been done and the next appointment scheduled. Blythe was standing by a dark green pickup truck, and Koda was sitting at his feet, and the afternoon was that specific Edmonton October kind. The kind where the light is doing something with the leaves that makes everything look like a photograph of itself. She had his discharge papers. She handed them over. "He's going to be okay," she said. "I know." He folded the papers without looking at them. "Then, you work with the rehab program, the one for service dogs." She had not mentioned this to him. "How did you know that?" I asked the receptionist. She studied him. "I do. Saturday mornings. It's informal. Just a couple of us. Some of the handlers come in. Koda could use that." "Yes," she said. "He could." He looked down at the dog, then back at her. Something moved across his face that she recognized from years of sitting in difficult rooms with people who were trying to say true things. The look of a man who had been told by a dog something he had not been willing to hear from a person. "My ex-wife used to say I trusted Koda more than I trusted people," he said. Not bitterly. Just factually, the way he seemed to say most things. "Sounds like you both have good instincts," Wren said. He looked at her for a moment. Something that was almost a smile crossed his face, was deliberated over, and was allowed to stay. "Saturday mornings," he said. 9 o'clock. Side entrance. He nodded. Koda stood and pressed his flank against Blythe's leg in a way that was unmistakably deliberate, and then looked up at Wren, and then back at Blythe, as though he had arranged something and wanted acknowledgement for it. Wren crouched one more time. Let Koda bump his forehead against hers. Felt the warm weight of him, the absolute sincerity of him. "Smart dog," she told Blythe. "Smarter than me," he said. "That's a high bar," she said, apparently. This time he did smile. She stood up, and she walked back toward the clinic door, and she did not look back, because she knew, the way you know, sometimes, without needing to check, that they were both still there, and that something that had been braced against itself for a very long time was learning, cautiously and without guarantees, to stand differently. There is a thing that happens in clinic work, in any work that asks you to sit with people at their worst. You stop being surprised by what breaks first. It is almost never what anyone expects. It is almost never the obvious thing. Blythe had done 2 tours in Kandahar and 1 in Mali, and had come home carrying things he didn't have names for yet. Koda had run point on 7 missions in 18 months and had taken shrapnel in the hip that the base assessment had declared healed and the body had disagreed with, quietly, for 8 months after. What broke through first for both of them was not a conversation or a medication or a follow-up appointment. It was a woman sitting on the floor in the middle of a veterinary clinic and meaning it, not performing care, not managing a situation, not doing a job, but meaning it, and an animal who could tell the difference. Wren would think about this later. She would think about it on a Saturday morning in November, standing in the side parking lot with coffee going cold in her hand, watching Koda move through a set of low-impact exercises with an ease he hadn't had 2 months ago. She would think about her brother, who had spent 3 months refusing to talk, and then one afternoon at the kitchen table had started and not stopped for 2 hours. She would think about how trust is not a door you open. It is more like weather. You cannot force it. You can only make a place where it is possible to arrive. Blythe was not a changed man. She was not naive enough to think that was how it worked. He was a complicated man who had started sleeping in the same room as his dog again, instead of the separate arrangement he'd maintained for months, because the nightmares woke Koda, and he hadn't wanted to burden him. He was a man who showed up on Saturdays, reliably, at 9 o'clock, and who had started asking her questions that were not about Koda. Small questions, the kind you ask when you're testing whether conversation is safe. She answered them the way she answered most things, directly, without performance, leaving room for the next one. Koda, for his part, had decided that the matter was settled. He behaved, on Saturdays and on follow-up Thursdays, and in the small moments between, like a dog who had done the job and expected everyone else to catch up. He was not wrong, exactly. He had done the job. He had been doing it, in his way, for years, holding the line, moving through difficult terrain, coming back. That was what working dogs did. They came back. They brought you with them if they could. Wren understood this. She had learned it, like most things, by watching. The Edmonton light was doing its October thing again on the last Saturday morning of the month when she saw it clearly. Koda sitting between them in the parking lot. Blythe's hand loose at his collar. Her coffee finally cold and nobody caring, and thought that some things start in the middle of a waiting room, in front of strangers, without anyone planning them. The dog knew first. The dog always knew first. That was enough. That was, she thought, watching Koda tilt his heavy head toward the pale northern sun, exactly enough.